My stories, I guess, have been published in Elle magazine, also award-winning Australian writing, the Grieve anthology. I'm trying to think of the other places.
The L one, you got first place out of that competition and published, and also a good prize from Hashtag Press as well. Was that right?
Yeah, that's right. So that was a story that I wrote called Nulla Paris, a short story. So it was the winner of their National Short Story Award. And there was quite some lovely prize money attached to that, which very rarely happens for writers. So that was wonderful feedback, I think, and that story that I wrote was, oh my god, that was 2 years in the making, so that was a beautiful sort of, I guess, payoff, for want of a better word for that. So yeah, so I've also been a finalist in the Newcastle Short Story Award, and won other awards, including the Society of Women Writers Short Story Award as well. That was a number of years ago. My work has appeared in other places as well.
The monologue competition, is that right too?
Yeah, so I performed a comedic piece about a woman's relationship with her talking vibrator named Dame Edna Everidge. And that was performed at, in Sydney, well, I think it was last year, might have been the beginning of last year. And yeah, that was a great thrill. So that was a short comedic piece that I wrote, and that was performed by an actress named Beatrix, which was pretty funky and cool to watch that. And then I've also performed in Australian Poetry Slam, so I've kind of kept it pretty diverse and do lots of different things and just to mix things up. So yeah.
Fantastic. Shell Reedy, everybody, welcome. And Nick, give us a quick shout-out.
Yeah, I apologise, I'm on the back end of laryngitis, so I've barely got a voice, but I will push through it. So I started off, I did the Grieve anthology as well, and I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, which was my first entrance into anything outside of writing for myself in my little dingy office. And won the 100 Writers Centre Members Award and the People's Choice Award for that. And then I started competitive writing through mainly the MIC Midnight competition, and had wonderfully some success with that. I was a top 10 finalist in the 2017 Flash Fiction competition, and then I won the 2018 Short Story competition.
And sorry, you said NYC, that's the New York
Midnight, yeah.
New York Midnight competition.
Yeah, so, and I've also been published in a couple of horror magazines. I do like my horror, so mainly Flash Fiction, so yeah.
All right, well, can we just jump back to 2 years, Shell, on that other short story that took its place, and love of horror and other things. What sense of fulfilment do short stories bring you?
I think for me, I think it kind of, I was thinking about this the other day because you sent us a list of all these amazing questions, and I was like, why am I drawn to writing short stories? I think it actually suits my personality and my temperament quite well, in that I can be quite an intense personality. For me, the experience of writing a short story is quite intense. It's also very labour intensive. I think a lot of people assume that, you know, you're kind of cheating a little bit when you write a short story and that it's a fairly easy genre to master, but it's actually, yeah, from what I've learned over the years, it seems to get harder to actually write a good story.
And when you say intense for you, you're saying because it's a super focus, you're really pushing into it.
Yeah, for me it's like this very, very intense focus when I'm writing a short story, and there's a real buzz that I get out of that. I really, really enjoy that process. Obviously the drafting process is quite different to the editing process, but I love that intensity. I love you know, the simple beauty of a short story, but I think it's also, I've written short stories because I've read so many short stories over the years that have literally just blown my mind. In terms of, you know, like I think sometimes short stories have left more of an indelible impact on my life more than novels. So there is something about that brevity of form and also the intensity of a short story. It's definitely an artwork, and some are easier to write than others, and
yeah. And Nick, yourself, what's the buzz?
I think primarily it suits my attention span, basically. So yeah, and what it also allows me to do is have that immediate sense of satisfaction. So I think if you're in the middle of writing a longer piece, you know, you're not getting that fulfillment, you're not getting that satisfaction. So writing short stories allows me to have that.
To feel like you're validated.
That's right. I've actually succeeded in doing something. So yeah.
Wonderful. on that, we're talking about brevity, so there's the getting it out there, the story, but then it's making every word count. What's your process, if you have one, about ensuring, they're a super efficient word form, I think, far more than a long form book. What do you do to make every word hit its mark and count?
I think
You can say pass.
You hit your head against the wall many times to make it work. God, it's actually a really big question for me. It's a massive question. I think there's kind of two parts, I guess, to that question in terms of when you're drafting. So in those initial drafts, I'm kind of getting those words down, but also looking at the actual overall arc of the story. I'm looking at the tension. I'm looking at the characters. I'm also ultimately looking at there's got to be some sort of resolution at the end. Not that a short story is ever neatly tied up, but there is that sense that there's either some redemption for the character or the character is on the brink of change. And that can be the smallest hint of change. It could be the smallest,
it doesn't have to be fully
tiniest.
rounded out, does it?
No, and I think they're the best short stories.
Yes.
So, but I think in terms of the editing process for that, in terms of tips for people, I think it's looking at, it's almost like, I guess when you're editing, you're looking at every single word. You're looking at your descriptions, you're making sure that, your similes, your metaphors are kind of fitting with the theme or the mood of the piece as well. You're looking for voice. Voice is massive, I guess. That's probably the biggest. If you can get the voice down and master the voice, that's probably one of the most important things in a short story, and making sure that your characters are convincing and authentic. And it's almost like, you have these beautiful love affairs with your characters when you write a short story, and sometimes there's a real sense when I've finished a short story of real sense of sadness that I've actually left that character, because for me they're incredibly real, tangible things. So
I'm with Michelle on that one, but, and I agree. It's every time I'm writing a story, I think you need, as a writer, you need to fall in love with the characters. You need to fall in love with what you're trying to say. I think, and that for me personally, that's when I know when to leave the story too. Is when I'm falling out of love with the characters.
Falling out of love. There you go. No, it's not working. Yeah, wonderful. Let's talk too, as we touched on, it doesn't have to be a rounded story. Let's talk about plot and plot structure, because short stories can be anything really, can't they? There's no guidelines, and it's the purpose of the medium to not follow guidelines in a way. What do you do in trying to structure? How do you structure story plot? Do you structure it?
Yeah. For short stories, especially for things like flash fiction and microfiction, I'm a big believer in media res, like starting in the midst of things, and also to starting as close to the end of the story as possible. So you're really jumping into the thick of things, and then you use dialogue, you don't really have time for set-up exposition or anything like that. So you're really jumping into the thick of things. And but look, it's especially, some of the competitions I've entered, it's 250 words to tell a story, and that's, it's hard to tell a joke in 250 words, so it's, you've really got to be selective. You've just got to try and find an effective way, whilst conveying voice and things like that, and so it can be difficult.
Jill, did you want to add anything else, or can I throw you another question? Where does the nuggets of your ideas come from? Do you have moments where it's like, boom, it's there, and then you've got to explore, or what is it?
I think for me the ideas come from, I'm a really image-driven person, so I also do a lot of artwork in my spare time as well, so often I will see an image, whether it's in the street or somewhere that I've been, and there's something curious or something really bizarre about that image, and sometimes that image alone can form the basis of an entire short story. So I'll give you an example of that. Family is a really good, for me, family's a really good, it's a rich vessel there with family, and I come from an incredibly dysfunctional family, so it's all been handed there for me on a platter since I've been a very young age. So I think there was actually a story that I wrote a while ago. It was called Helena Houdini, and that story was actually about an elderly woman in a nursing home that actually falls in love or has this beautiful relationship with a tree on the grounds of the nursing home, and it's about her quite dysfunctional relationship with her daughter. So it was predominantly a very fictional short story. I came to love this. She was a very quirky, eccentric woman. But how that short story started was I was actually visiting my mum for Christmas. My mum and my stepfather and their two dash hounds, which are both on antidepressants and in a lot of counselling and therapy.
Rich, right? Rich.
Yeah. And that was also the basis for another short story, but we won't talk about that. But when I was there, my mum has actually had a number of, she's had some physical health issues over the years. She has what's called peripheral neuropathy, where she has a dropped foot and finds it quite difficult to walk at times. And since she's been sick, and my stepfather has also been very sick, he's a Vietnam veteran, and he's had a number of physical and mental health issues over the years, my mum's world has shrunk quite a bit. But anyway, to get to the idea for the short story, my mum and I were walking through this back reserve at the back of her house, and it's all these beautiful paper bark trees, and it's in suburbia, but it's quite a quiet little place. And my mum was walking through these paper barks, and she went up to this paper bark and she was stroking it, and I was looking up at this tree, and it was like this really sad, lonely image. But my mum had said to me, quirkily enough, I've been listening to the ABC and I want to go and do a forest retreat. There's all these people that pay lots of money to connect with trees and to fall in love with trees. But it was just this incredibly striking image of my mum reaching out to this tree, and I think it actually had a really big emotional impact for me. So the character in that story was certainly not my mum, but it was just that central image that then I was like, I really want to explore that sense of alienation, and that came out through a fictional character in a nursing home and feeling that sense of marginalisation, I guess, from the world.
I mean, you took the moment there to stop and actually observe that moment and not let it fleet past, which I think many people do. So it's also, is it taking the time to see whether it's the absurdity, the sadness, the joy of these moments, go, there's a story idea here.
Yeah, I think Natalie Goldberg talks about every writer experiences life twice. We see it and then we observe it as a writer, and I think there's something.
Yes.
It's kind of a weird headspace to be in sometimes. I've had really sad conversations with friends over the years over the phone, like, you know, they can be quite serious conversations, and they're telling me about breakups or losing a parent, and then I'm going, oh my god, this is like, there's something in that, and sometimes I have to, it's an ethical dilemma too at times, because you're like, I really want to record that, but that's a great stepping stone for a work of fiction, and I think you can do a lot with just things that people tell you, and so there is that being quiet and watching and listening to what people are saying.
Nick, before you spoke about voice and, you know, the belief that when your voice is right, then a lot of things can flow. Does it then become a compass for what should or shouldn't stay in a story? Does this relate to the voice?
Well,
the tone?
yeah, well, yes, but I mean too, especially with short stories and flash, I mean, you're focusing essentially on one scene most of the time, because you don't have time to, you know, multiple scenes. Normally one character, one central character, and yeah, with the micro stuff, I mean, really, I mean, the character's voice is coming through it. So I guess it does influence it, but I mean, yeah, it's yeah.
On that, I mean, from your experience in reading other people's shorts and your own and different competitions and panels you've been on, what constitutes a bad short story, or a short story that's not quite working? Is it too many elements competing? I'm throwing that one out there, and maybe this is a question.
Wow, I'm going to give this microphone to you, I think. Well, no, I don't. Well, I mean, it's hard to say. It's almost, you can't quantify it really. You know when you finish reading it. I mean, it's like with long stories too. I don't think, you know, necessarily matters what format it's in, but I mean, really, it's the lack of connection with what's actually taking place, the characters, the setting. But I mean, also too, leaving too many things unanswered. You know, look, I'm all for stories where there are more questions left than answers given at the end of it. But I mean, yeah, I think that there's just, you know, there's just an unsatisfying feeling, and sometimes it is hard to put your finger on.
Yeah, I think it is that, but sometimes it's also really evident too when you read short stories. And I remember when I first started writing years ago, I don't know, I think for me it's something about the narrative tension of a piece as well, and you don't have long in a short story to create that And that literally has to be set up from the get-go. Literally probably in that first 3 or 4 paragraphs you have to have that central conflict set up so you don't have a lot of time to waste. For me, short stories, there's always some sort of, in my head, there's a physical anchoring of setting, but that, for me, most short stories have got like this barest amount of a hint of the setting, which may, and setting can be used very well, I think, in short stories as well. It can be quite symbolic, but obviously you don't have pages and pages of exposition about the way the trees are moving and things like that. So, yeah.
Shell, to a point, your short story Dashhounds on antidepressants. As soon as you've done the title, you pretty much know not what's going to happen, but the feel and the tone and a hint of the voice too. What's the importance of the title in, and as you say, that first couple of lines in setting the reader up?
Yeah, crucial. I think it was the first paragraph in that was just bam, you're immediately oriented into that world.
Yes.
And that voice shot through in that piece really quickly. I actually spoke about that on a panel yesterday. I almost had a car accident writing that story because I was actually writing it as I was driving through traffic. And I was actually thinking about something else and
were you texting ma'am while you were driving? No, I'm writing a short story, policeman. I'm an artist, get out of my way.
Oh, it was insane. I put it like this voice shot through, and it doesn't happen often with short stories. And I was like, I have to get this down. So I literally have this notepad balancing it on the wheel as I'm driving through the straight at Tuggerah. It was just insane. And I literally ran through my door when I got home because I was like, excuse me, excuse my pressure. I need to get this down. I need to get that down, and those moments are really, for me, rare in short story writing. They're beautiful, like they're the moments that you love when you find that voice. And for me, like when that voice shoots through, it's almost like, probably the best metaphor I could use to describe that is when, when you're on the plane, over 10,000 metres above the air, and your ears are blocked, and then you're coming into land and your ears pop. So then you go from this muted sound sensation to all of a sudden, and so all of a sudden that sound is crystallised and everything's really crisp and clear and focused, and that's what it feels like for me when that voice comes through. I don't know if it's like that for you, Mick, but it feels very much like that.
What a beautiful observation anyway, that audio observation, what is that?
Yeah. Thank you, yeah.
No, wonderful. What about, we spoke briefly about the culling process. What about changing direction? If you're mid-story and suddenly it's evolving into something else, do you go with it or do you go, no, this is a short story, I want to come back? Do you go with the flow or cull or both?
Well, I treat short stories and flash micro like a sprint. So normally, by the time I get to the point where I want to change my mind, the story's already written. So, but I mean, I think you always have to leave yourself some leeway for the characters to decide what they want to do in the story. So especially, I mean, it's easier in longer, prose because you've got more room to do that. But short stories normally, I don't think most of my short stories, they end up where I want them to end up. Occasionally they don't. I've been writing something lately, and it's funny how he was talking about where inspiration strikes with driving a car. I was in the bath, and I had to scramble out of the bath to go and get a notepad to write stuff down because I thought of a better ending for the story. So but most of the times with short stories, I'm usually pretty good with hitting the target that I set out to hit. So yeah,
that's great. Do you know when to stop writing? As in this short, this is where the short should end.
Yeah, well, I mean, word count helps. If you've got a limit, that kind of helps. But I think because I deliberate over every single word. And I love that Oscar Wilde quote about, I spent the morning putting a comma in the afternoon, taking it back out again. Because I think, that's when I realise I have to stop because I just start nitpicking over every little thing.
I'm sure you talk about those two different headsets of the draft and then the editing. What's the flip between them?
As in the difference between the two?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess, I don't know, drafts are so much fun, they're so playful, you've got the whole world at your fingertips without sounding like a masochist, it's just an amazing feeling.
You're God.
And then I guess all that heart, you are God. So it's quite an exciting process. Sometimes it can be quite a scary process. There's a lot of uncertainty with it, but for me it's always about that surprise because I always sit down sometimes and I think, that's what I'm going to start writing about, and then nothing so I'm definitely not a plotter. I just fly by the seat of my pants when I write and trust that the story will emerge. So, but for the editing process, it's such a different thing, and I find it's an agonising process. It's so intensive. It's very, very intensive, and sometimes that's, you think you've actually finished a short story, and you send it out, and you get a number of rejections. You might get some positive feedback, which is lovely. Like I had that from Kill Your Darlings once, and they were like, "This story has so much potential." So then, and that story was a 2-year kind of on and off again, going back, reshaping, taking on feedback, comments from my writing group. But you do, for me, in the editing process, it's such an intense feeling, and I don't know, that sounds a bit cliche, but it really is. It's quite an intense process because, as Mick said, you are labouring on every single word. But I also liken it to being a juggler. You are juggling in a short story because you have so limited time. You are juggling multiple elements at once. You're thinking about so many different things, and that's quite a complex process. You can't overthink it too much, but you're juggling so much. So yeah, it's exhausting. I've finished a short story, there's been a few, and I've just,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Keep me a vodka.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nick, for you?
Yeah, well, sorry, talking about when to finish a story, or yeah.
Oh, the editing.
Editing. Look, I mean, see, the funny thing is, everyone has a different approach, but I actually edit as I write. I probably shouldn't. I've been told not to do it, but I think it's worked for me. It works for me. So I don't like to leave messes.
Yes.
So, normally my first draft is about either the third or the fourth draft because I've been sort of, culling as I finish each sentence. But yeah, look, it's hard, but I mean, it's getting things down the page and then going through and look, letting it sit for a bit helps too, I think. So even overnight, just giving it some breathing space and then going back. You normally hate it. I hate it the next day, and then I fall in love with it again and chip away at it really until I get what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Before, like you said, we hear people say you should complete your draft before editing. Other people know I edit on the fly. It really says there's no rules, isn't there? It's what works for you and your creative process. That's
people get really competitive about things too, like what's the right way to write something, what's the wrong way to do something. And it's funny, talking about our spec fic group that we belong to, like there's a really strong, and it has turned into a bit of a running joke, but it's the whole plotting versus pantsing thing, which is the better school of writing. And look, there isn't. If you're writing and you're getting stuff done, there is no wrong way.
Exactly right. You
people just like to choose sides. So.
Yeah, and there's enough evidence that any side and other sides we still don't even know will work.
Well, that's it.
Yeah. So before we talk about writers group, what's the importance have you found, or is there one in writers group? I mean, in forcing work out and being open to critiquing, etc. Yeah, you go and Shell. Yeah.
It's funny because we're all in a writers group, so
I just want to
my
find out
current
if you
writing
like
group
me or
is
not.
really
I won't listen.
shit.
I just want to know if you think I'm contributing.
Look, honestly, I've been the writing group that we're currently in, we're a very small group. There's only 4 of us, but that writing group has evolved and changed shape. Oh my god, so much in the last. I think we've kind of been together for the last few years. I think it's been now, but that's been integral for me. A writing group is really, really important, but it's also, I think, the writing group. It can help. I think like a good critique is good as well, but it's also about talking about the frustrations as well when you're writing short stories and how difficult it can be. It's that emotional support as well, because it can be quite a difficult and tough journey. I think getting your work published, and I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult. I think there's a lot of stuff going on, I guess, politically as well, where funding is drying up and literary journals are folding, and so that has a direct impact on writers and how much we can contribute and ultimately what we can get paid for.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I know with NYC, it's basically a competition where you get given genres of bits of action and whatnot. And for you, Shell, often you'll start with a short story and then when it's complete, find where it can go. These are kind of opposites, right? The short competition is you don't start writing until you get given and then you just write whatever springs to mind. The other is crafting. Do you have a preference as to which ones you like to do? in a way. Which comes first, the competition or
Well, I mean, I like both. The thing I like about that, I mean, I am a plotter. I will sit down and detail everything. I'll do character bios, everything like that. But with the competitions, you know, a lot of them you've got 24 hours, 48 hours, maybe a week if you're lucky. And I tend to pants those, you know. But what I liked about the competitions, and I love competing in these things, is, you know, you get assigned prompts, you get assigned genres, random genres, and I've had historical fiction, I've had romance, romantic comedy, political satire, and I, you know, every time I got a genre that was outside of my comfort zone, my heart just sank. But you know, what it allowed me to do, first of all, was step outside of my comfort zone, which I think as a writer is a wonderful thing to do. Like, if you have a particular penchant for a genre, you know, like I like horror, I like fantasy, I like sci-fi, but having to write things like rom-com and historic fiction, you know, I found it so beneficial as a writer because, you know, what it allows you to do is realise that there is a commonality for any story outside of any genre. So, and that was, I really liked it.
Anything else, Cheryl, to that? Or?
I think for me, I think the writing comes first before, but that being said, there has been odd occasions where I have actually seen competitions and then reworked stuff that I've been working on. Maybe there's a similar theme in a story that I've been working on and gone, yeah, that's the right fit, but I might need to go in and cull 2,000 words off it and go in and massacre it and see if I can get it in. So yeah, so mainly it's a writing first. I don't really think about where it's going to end up so much. There's a lot of anxiety sometimes. I'm not sure where I'll find the right home for that, because I think my stories seem to be getting a little bit weirder. Yeah, like a lot of surrealist humour stuff, which is a bit bent kind of stuff, and you know, there is that, I get that fleeting voice going, oh, where's that gonna end up? And I'm not sure if it will end up anywhere, but you know, the process was amazing. The process was amazing to write it, and I had so much fun. So that's ultimately what it's about. So,
how do you find writing competitions? As in, not finding they good or bad. Do you physically find, oh, here's a competition, and for the short story writers out there, how do you go about finding, here's a horror competition, here's a fiction or whatever?
I mean, there's, you know, really sort of certain places like the Australian Writers Centre, the ASA, you know, all these places. Follow anything on Facebook. They're always putting up, you know, competitions and things like that. So yeah, just putting yourself out there and just following as many people as possible. You know, writers that you admire, and you know, they're always posting things as well. So yeah.
Sure, yourself.
I think Writing New South Wales has been my main go-to for finding out about competitions, but I also think it is good to, as Mick said, just explore, follow different hashtags, follow the writers that you like, joining different writing groups, and even just talking to different writers. I don't know how often that's happened over the years. Someone's tagged me on Facebook or whatever about a competition and gone, oh, hey, yeah, so...
Yeah. Cool. Well, how did you learn the craft of short story writing? Because it's a wonderful art, mate. Yeah.
Look, it sounds so droll and so cliche, but you just write, you just get, and you know, I mean, I grew up reading short stories too. My grandmother, and she was a lovely, kind-hearted lady, which means obviously she had a terrible and dark secret. But she, you know, I had a macabre personality kid. I loved reading, you know, Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft. So she would buy me these books. Every Christmas she would buy me these short story books, and she'd scroll in them like, you know, Dear Michael, and just this long on the front page. And I've still got some of them, you know. So, but I just used to read them. I used to read them and then thought, you know, I want to start writing these things. So, yeah.
Let's go back to a sorry, Shirley, you were about to say
Sure, we'll just
what was that terrible dark secret?
I never found out, but she just had that faraway look in her eyes. I thought, she knows something, man. You know, yeah.
That's our next short story competition. Michael's grandma's
That's
dark
right.
secret.
There's a prompt for you right there. There's a prompt for you.
That's great. Does this go back to the joy of bedtime storytelling, campfires, where short stories shared have this wonderful deep thing in our psyche? You know, we love this short grab, and that's why I love short stories, is because it's a wonderful short burst and beautiful to before drifting to sleep or whatever
Well, that's why I love these short story anthologies, because they're like bite-sized horrors,
Yes.
nightmares. You know, you just sort of take a chunk and, you know, you start and finish the story before you get to bed, and then probably not sleep half the time. But yeah, what,
I think for me, I read a lot of I think they actually stopped publishing it now. Best Australian Short Stories. So that anthology was released every year. I think for, I don't know if it was 15 years or something. So I think I've got just about every single anthology, and I often reread short stories. So for me, it is definitely that burst, that punch. It's almost like a punch, a short story. Not in a violent way, but there's something really beautiful about a short story, and a lot of them have left really have massive impacts on my life. Probably more so, in some ways, more so than a novel. It's hard to define that. I think because of that intensity of it as well.
Can we talk about rejection in terms of what do you do to keep yourself going? And we know, Stephen King used to put all his rejection letters on this spike on his wall, and at one point the spike fell off the wall or something, so full of rejection. What do you do to just go, it doesn't matter, we keep going anyway? Or do you collapse into a fetal position and cry? What do you do with rejection?
well, I'm fine with rejection. I have trouble with acceptance and confidence. Rejection, I'm totally cool with. But no, look, I mean, especially if you get a couple in a row. Look, we're writers. We're very sensitive individuals, So it's always going to hurt. It's always going to hurt. But if there's a common theme to the rejections, like if there's maybe one or two people are suggesting, and this is why writing forums is so helpful too, especially with competitions. Because you're getting feedback from fellow writers in the competition, and they're often giving quite critical feedback, in a way rejecting the story you've been writing. And if I'm noticing a common theme, I tend to take notice, So yeah, but look, I don't really know the answer to that one, because I'm still trying to work out how the heck you just, you keep going and believing in yourself regardless, So, I mean, you're doing it because you love it. So, I mean, yeah, sure, rejection hurts, but you've got that lovely face shows.
Yes,
I think it's a big question. It's a massive question because it is it's a long journey, and I think most writers face an enormous amount of rejection. So it's about picking yourself up when that happens. I think it's also about not trying, and that's really difficult because I'm quite a sensitive person. So it is your baby that you've nurtured this short story, and you've spent possibly hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours working on a single piece of work. So you are going to take it personally, I guess, in some respects, but it's also good to look at the bigger picture of things too. So, for me, it's also like when I send off to a short story competition, I'm a bit more strategic about it than what I used to be. So I will look at the judges, get a sense of what their literary tastes are, maybe even jump in and read some of the stories that they've written, just do a little bit more research into it, because, I mean, ultimately it can be a subjective thing too. Publications are also looking for things that may...
Very subjective,
Yes, yeah. So I think it's good to take stock of that, but also be aware of broader things that are going on, I guess, culturally for writers as well at present. Because I had a hard year last year where I got a number of rejections, but it was really useful. I often email a bunch of writers, two other female writers who I spoke with on a panel at the Australian Short Story Festival a couple of years ago. H.C. Giltvine is an amazing short story writer, and Belinda Hermel, and we often email each other, but part of that emailing is we just have a massive rant, a massive bitch about how tough things are. And I had a tough year last year, and it was really interesting because they were kind of saying the same things. Like, it's really difficult at the moment, and it's good. It's a consolation to hear that.
It's actually really constructive to offload, isn't it? Because we're dealing with mental health, we're dealing with our own brain space that is the organ to create with. It's important to do this, isn't it? To give yourself space to be able to rant and offload. I don't think rant as in going feral or crazy, but maybe you do. I don't know. It doesn't matter, does it?
I was listening to there's a podcast. Charlotte Wood has a podcast, The Writers' Room, and she interviewed Vicky Hastridge. She's written a book, Swimming with Jellyfish. She just had a new book published, but I've forgotten what it's called now. But that podcast was really interesting because Vicky Hastridge actually spent 5 years writing a novel, and it went nowhere. And after spending 5 years writing this novel, decided to abandon it and she became quite disillusioned about being published, but also about the writing process and a whole bunch of other things. And so she actually decided to made a decision to step away from writing. But it was a really interesting podcast because she actually spoke about how she just wanted to observe and be in the world again. And it was actually quite a creative journey that she went on, but it was an unintentional. It actually led to writing another book, but she decided to step away and not write for a while, which is really interesting as well, because I think a lot of writers have those fallow periods where we do get burnout, we're tired, it's tough. You need to regroup, you need to be in the world again, because sometimes we're not.
Absolutely, we disappeared, and that's why I think the importance of writers group, of emailing these other authors that you do, it's so easy to disappear, isn't it, and not reconnect, and go and hug some trees and everything else that you need.
But I mean, look, I know of some fantastic writers who have given up as well because of rejection. It breaks my heart because I look at so many books that have been published where, I haven't enjoyed the book, I haven't enjoyed the writing. It's like, look, but they were so fearless in their determination to go through with it.
I think we've all seen that, haven't we? You read a short or a full-length book, and the same with films, and you go, how the fuck did that get published?
Yeah.
But it's persistence, right?
It is.
Yesterday, Susan Francis spoke about it when great editors were saying, this is terrible, you've got to completely rewrite this book, and she was aghast. And then she found this agent and went, no, we know how to make this work, this is what we have to do. So, and it's that persistence of finding like minds, maybe, or people that you will resonate with. Do you think that's not even a question?
Yeah, I think with the writers' groups too, though, is we may not like the piece, and we've all read each other's stuff, but or there may be a lot of criticism, there's a lot of feedback to give where we think we should maybe do this, or maybe try this, or this isn't working. But I mean, too, it's about having that positive feedback, giving each other, what is working in the story, focus on that, and go from there.
I know personally, having done the film and connected with filmmakers locally, but also overseas, and it provides me this great energy when we just email one another or Facebook message one another and just say, well done, what are you up to? And it's these little spur-ons, and I think it's actually really important. They're like little mini coaches or a mini team that's got your back. How important is that to you as well, in having these other people that you might email or whatever, to just be spurring you on?
Sometimes I've actually tried to talk to my mother about the processing, because she's a non-writer. It's quite frustrating.
Yeah.
She's like, oh well, you'll be okay. But sometimes, because when I had a rejection come in, that was last year, and I actually had some expectations about maybe that might go somewhere, and it didn't, and that's because it had been picked up by the same place before and had been performed, and so I was quite disappointed in myself, and I thought it was quite a strong piece, and I remember talking to my mum, and she didn't quite understand it, the labour of love I think that goes into it. So I think it's really important to answer your question about having writerly friends, and if they're not writers, artists, other creatives, musicians, people are part of the creative community, poets, because we're pretty much all in the same boat. I mean, I know it's different, but
and it's more than your heart, it's a bit of your soul or something is going into this piece, because it's your creation, like we're saying, there's the joke about we play God, but we're literally creating a world which then someone rejects. That's art, right? Yeah.
I also find fiction, it's easier for me to handle fiction, like a fiction, rejection with fiction, than it is as opposed to memoir or non-fiction. So that's a really interesting thing. I discovered that last year as well. So.
Do you think that's because it's more personal?
I think so. Even though fiction, like I am channeling emotions into my characters, they're like little puppets, and I am channeling emotions or feelings that I've felt in my life, or an idea that I'm exploring through a character or a number of characters, so they're kind of echoes of me. But I think fiction for me feels safer to push out into the world as opposed to memoir and non-fiction. So,
What's technology letting us do for short story writers that wasn't happening years ago?
Well, that's a fantastic distraction from writing for a start.
The social media black hole.
Well, I mean, formatting for a start, you know, and little things like that. It's just really, it allows you to focus on just words, just keep the words down. And, but also too, obviously, it's opening up opportunities that weren't there, and then you talk about the publishing side of things as well, and you know, all these opportunities that weren't there 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, what about, sorry, before you spoke about some of your favourite authors when you were younger that you read your stories, do you still have authors that are your favourite that you just love to read, or you know you can pick up one of their books and flip to any short story and just enjoy it?
Stephen King, you know, I grew up reading Different Seasons and Four Past Midnight, and Neil Gaiman, Fragile Things. I can just pick up any of his short stories or any books or stuff and just, you know, enjoy them.
I love anthologies because I think you just get such a diversity of writers and different styles and voices, and there's some really experimental pieces in some of the anthologies, I guess. So, but for me, Laurie Moore, she's an American writer. I absolutely adore her short stories. Chris Womersley, he's written a number of really beautiful short stories. He's an Australian writer. Karen Hitchcock is an amazing writer as well, short story writer. I'm trying to think, and Julie Coe and Ryan O'Neill, they're probably my favourite Australian writers. Julie Coe wrote a mind-blowing anthology of short stories that using surrealist humour, and it's one of the most amazing collections of short stories, so that had a massive impact on my life.
Sorry, who was that? I've got to write that down. Who was it?
Julie Coe, so it's Julie Koh, and her collection of short stories called Portable Curiosities. Which is the perfect title for it. Yeah.
I love learning things at festivals.
And Ryan O'Neill, I mean, I think most people here would know Ryan O'Neill, Newcastle-based short story writer, who I absolutely adore. His work is really beautiful as well. So, yeah.
Now, in your pursuit of short stories, have you found your voice or your style? Just an easy one to end on before we throw the question.
Sure. Yes, I have actually, because as having to be brutal, like if you've got a word limit, you know, it really taught me, because my style is very sparse, it's very direct, it's very compressed, and you know, that's where I learned, that's where I cut my teeth, basically. So my style, my voice has developed from writing short stories. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yes and no. I feel like there's definitely a strong voice or style, but then obviously every short story is completely different. So sometimes it can be unexpected things that come up and your voice or style changes as time progresses, and I think some of that's informed by the things that you're curious or obsessed about with life too. So, and that can be manifested through different characters' voices. So yeah, it's definitely like I have a lot of patterns of things that I like to explore in my short stories, which and stylistically, I guess there's definitely there is that. And sometimes I remember a couple of years ago I got really frustrated that, I guess this is more about style of voice, but I was exploring some quite deep grief and loss stuff through works of fiction. So I sort of had I started to read a lot of surrealist humour, just really experimental short stories, because I really wanted to change things up just to balance things out for me as a writer, because I was starting to feel a bit burnt out. Because I was exploring some of the voices in those short stories were quite intense. So I think it's a lifelong process, the voice stuff.
Yes, as we shift
we're always evolving,
Exactly. We've got time for questions. I've got more questions, but I thought let's throw it open so it's not just me yapping on. Does anybody have questions they'd like to ask Nicole Michelle? Surely someone has. There's no bad questions. We're all friends here. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, ask something controversial.
My grandmother. Not too good, I'm afraid.
I was just going to ask, what are the essential things to go into a short story? Like you said earlier, you don't have the space in a short story to develop the plot the way you might in a novel. But it's all like just a pile of things. So what are the beginnings of the things need to be?
Well,
for me, it's like, So obviously character, plot, conflict, tension, and voice. You're also then looking at other, the smaller stuff about imagery and metaphors and making, you've got consistency and continuity there. And a really strong, obviously, I mean, it's hard to, a very, very strong beginning where literally in those first couple of paragraphs we're thrown, in media res straight into that story. You don't have time to explain things. You've got to set that up incredibly quickly.
And I treat it really like a joke. Like you have your setup and you have your punchlines. So you just sort of got some good strong verbs too. Like get rid of obviously every word counts when you're writing a short story. So it's I think it goes.
Are you brutal on adjectives?
Look, they do sneak in. I am, and it's funny. And look, I'm totally with Stephen King on the whole. The part the hell is paint with adverbs. And it's funny. I used to love adverbs, but every time I read one now, and the funny thing is, he says that. Then I read a book, and it's just full of adverbs. Not bloody practice what you preach. That's it. But look, I think sometimes it really helps. But if they're always the first things to go. I need to cull words, adjectives and adverbs. Yeah.
I think there's also something about, I don't know, like it's like the mood or the tone of a short story, and that's something that's probably a little bit, that's really important as well. And some short stories have a really distinctive sense of rhythm in a short story too. So,
And dialogue, it's a really good way of conveying the tone. Like I wrote a story at 1920s gumshoe detective, and the way he spoke I didn't have to explain where it was. I'm hoping you kind of got that from how he was speaking, what he was saying.
Yeah, don't double up on your elements, but use each element to do a job effectively. Yeah. Awesome. More questions. Yeah.
So, are you saying that short stories just gives you an excuse to go into the meaningless, rather than have a beginning, a middle, and an end? You can just go and let people figure out.
Are you saying to not have purpose in the story, or not a traditional?
No, just meaningless. I mean, you don't. If you don't have to explain anything, you're talking about all that. It's just a moment, and then it's gone, and it's up to the audience to put what they want on it.
There might be a difference there between meaningless versus actually explaining it highly succinctly. Yeah, do you think?
Yeah, I think you've still got to be saying something. Otherwise, it is meaningless. But I mean, any story really. Like I've read stories and I've sort of sat back and gone, what the heck was that about? So I think Woodens obviously didn't get what the writer was trying to say. But I don't look. I tend to have a lot more fun with short stories than I do with the longer prose. Because I think, like I said, you're not dedicating 5 years to writing one story and then realising you're not happy with it, or other people aren't happy with it. So I think you can have a lot more fun. But I mean, I think you've always got to have something to say, But
Just along with that, a really good short story can take a number of years to write, though. Yeah. Do you have experiences of really having to chew over a short story over a long period?
Yeah, I had a story that I despaired that would never go anywhere. And I think that was 2.5 years of writing and going back in and rewriting. Obviously that 2.5 years wasn't intensively me writing every single hour of the day, but there was definitely what Mick brought up before, where putting it aside, having a bit of distance from it. That was an epic story, but I remember those first initial drafts, and I was actually chewing it over in my mind. I was starting to take notes, and those initial drafts, I remember quite distinctly when I wrote that first draft, I was like, Jesus, there's something in this, there's something in this, but it took me a while, and that was a lot of chewing and throwing and playing around with things, taking it to a couple of different writing groups, getting feedback, sending it off, getting rejections, and then getting feedback from Kill Your Darlings, and they said, yeah, we really like this story, it just needs you gave me some suggestions, but that was a very long process, that story, and I didn't think that was going to go anywhere, it did, which was quite surprising because I sort of had got a bit tired of seeing it out. So yeah.
Yeah, I've got a story, a 2,500 word story, and I love it, but I have not been able to figure out the ending yet. It's about 3 years old, it's sitting in my drawer. It's just something that I'm waiting for that burst of inspiration to come, maybe a little message under my pillow in the morning, I don't know, but I'm still waiting for the ending to present itself. So yeah, look, it's 3 years sitting there doing nothing.
And some do go nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, my laptop is a graveyard. All these unfinished short stories. There's so many of them, but yeah. Occasionally I've gone in and dissected some of those and gone, I'll pull that into, because there was one sentence in it, I was like, I love that. Yes, let's pop that in. That was a beautiful description, and I laboured on that for about 4 days.
That is important too. You're actually building a kind of a family of all these different ideas, aren't you? So it's important not to let them go completely, because they will probably come back in some other form. There's a reason your brain's turned up,
Yeah. So just going on with that, the burden to complete a work. How do you deal with that? Like, yeah, the sense that you've started something, and we have this work ethic that you've started it, but you've got to finish it. How do you live that, and how do you grieve it when it's sort of like put up into it? Not all of us want to go and live under. Spend 5 years in Bali because we burnt out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think when I started writing, and I think most writers do it too, but you'd start a story, you'd get halfway through and then you'd move on to another one. So like you said, an entire file of these half-started stories. But look, that one in particular, it's bugging me because I really love the story. I love where it's set. I like the characters. So, but I got so frustrated trying to force an ending on it, and so I just thought, look, give it that distance, and hopefully one day, it could even be 15, 20 years, and suddenly the ending will pop up. I never try and force my writing. I think, obviously it's important to complete something, but yeah, this one particularly was giving me a lot of grief.
Patience, lots of patience. I don't know, for me it's patience, and I'm an incredibly impatient person at times, so it has taught me that, I think, to trust that some aren't ready to go, or they need a lot more time, and you need to be in the world, because sometimes you're sitting in the bath, although you have baths, but you're in the shower, or you're somewhere, and suddenly it occurs to you, holy shit, that's what is wrong with it. I can be in the supermarket.
Supermarket's a good one for me. I live in a very colourful neighbourhood, so you're talking about where you get your ideas from. I'm always going down to the supermarket because I come back with a whole list of ideas, particularly dialogue. So that's it.
Yeah. I'm exactly the same. Public transport and supermarkets are the best things to overhear in people.
Yeah, it's a bit creepy when you're sitting there writing things down in a notepad with your ear against a cereal box, listening to the aisle next door. It's a bit creepy.
It's not creepy. That's normal. That's okay. Writers immunity. Sure. Yeah, writers immunity.
We need a badge or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just any other questions? All right. Well, look, that can pretty much wrap it up. I think I want to thank everybody for coming along and listening. I hope you've all got something out of it. And special thanks to Shell and Mick. And please hang around too for the next session, right? This is the short story prize. So good luck to everybody there. Yeah, but thank you. Please thank Shell and Mick.